Welcome everybody, thanks for coming out. I was asked to please talk to you about social media tonight and the effects on children. So I want to do this in a couple of parts at least. I want to talk about whether or not we're having a mental health crisis, and then I want to talk about the effects of social media on the brain and some new research from the American Psychological Association. And then I want to do some what I would call EQ&A, which is easy questions and answers. So if at the end you guys have questions you want to ask, I would like to save some time for that. Okay? I want to begin with, well, I was asked to introduce myself, so I'll make that part quick. I am Christopher Cortman. I have been a Florida licensed psychologist since 1985, when I was 7, and one of the only second graders who were licensed that year as a psychologist. But I have been practicing full-time in Venice since 1986. I have amassed over 80,000 hours of psychotherapy. That's basically what I've done with my life, is sit in therapy sessions 1 hour after another, every day, all day long. As a result of that, I've learned a few things about people and have written 4 books. And now I'm blessed to have a radio show on Monday nights for, of all things, truck drivers, because I've never driven a truck and I don't know anything about that, but I have a radio show called Building Better Minds. I also have a program for children called the Social Black Belt, and it's a program that this school is actually considering using for all of your children. It's a program that teaches 10 simple truths, psychological truths, that for some reason we don't teach people, and I believe we really should, because we have a lot of wonderful information that children could benefit from. So that said, let me begin with something that happened in the past week. I'm going to talk about my daughter behind her back because she's not here, and fathers have a right to do that. Yes? Bring it up closer. That's better? Okay. So my daughter's 14, and there's a boy that she met recently who asked her a very simple question. The question is, am I cute? Can you imagine, as a 15-year-old boy asking a girl, am I cute? And I said to her, what did you say? And she said, I said, well, we're having some really nice weather recently, don't you think? And then I said, you know, you could say to him that your father won't let you date anyone right now. She said, yeah, I'm not interested in dating, but he still said, but am I cute? Well, I just read some things this past week that made that a really scary question to answer, because we have new research that says rejection is experienced in the same part of the brain where A, depression is experienced, and B, physical pain is experienced. Just perceiving that I have been rejected, that I'm not good enough, that I'm not adequate, the brain lights up in the same place as people who are depressed. And that's a pretty big responsibility. And I said to my daughter, regardless of whether you think this guy is really unattractive, don't say anything hurtful, because you have no idea what kind of an impact that can have on another person, especially a teenager. And what I'd like to share with you tonight as we progress into this is that we have a lot of new information about how the brain works just from the last 20, 30 years. And I'd like you to understand better. I'm not a neurologist. I'm not even a neuropsychologist. I'm a psychologist. But I want to share with you some recent information, some recent research that may shed some light on how social media tends to work on the brains of your children, your young people at home. Are we in a mental health crisis, by the way, in our country? Some people are nodding. Well, just a little bit of recent research. 1 in 3 teenage girls, 1 in 3, have considered suicide over the course of the past year. 1 in 3 teenage girls. And 1 in 5 kids who consider themselves to be LGBT, 1 in 5 have attempted suicide. 20% of the population, the teenage population of people who are grappling with their sexual orientation, LGBT, they've attempted suicide as a teenager. Here's a statistic that I stumbled on that's kind of disturbing to me. Between 2009 and 2019, the depression rates in this country doubled. Now notice the dates I gave you. 2019, that's pre-COVID. That's before the entire world stopped functioning and we asked people to distance themselves, to isolate themselves from one another. Our depression has gone off the charts over the last decade or so. We have other research that says there's a significant increase in anxiety disorders, and social anxiety disorder is a real issue with kids these days. And with the pandemic, what we did to children is we isolated them and kept them away from going to school and seeing their peers. And the social skills that one needs to develop in the early years were compromised by the fact that there was so much isolating going on. And a lot of children have no skills to just navigate through life. 1 in 5 adolescents, 1 in 5, 20%, according to the research, has a mental disorder of some kind. And only 1 out of those 5 gets help for it. So think about that. 20% of the adolescents in our country, according to the recent research, has a mental disorder of some kind, which should be treated. But of those people, only 1 in 5 actually get treatment. A poll found that 71% of parents said that their children were adversely affected by the pandemic. And 69% of parents said it was the worst thing that ever happened to their kids. Of all the things that their children had to face in life so far, the worst thing that happened was the COVID pandemic. Are we prepared to deal with these issues? And how do kids deal with these issues? Almost a third of the teens polled admitted that they were more unhappy and more depressed than usual. 31% or so said, I am more unhappy than I usually am. And this has been since the advent of the pandemic. And so I guess what I'm concluding with all this research is that we have mental health issues in this country, and unless we address them proactively, they're not getting better on their own. These are not things that are just going to get better. This is not something you grow out of. For instance, if we talk about social anxiety disorder, children don't typically just grow out of that. They have to learn skills to overcome their fears. You know, I remember being with a young man who was 13 at the time, and I said, I'm going to pull right here and get some gas. Go right in this restaurant and walk up to the person at the desk, the hostess, host, whatever, and say, "Table for 3, please," and I'll be right there as soon as I feel. And the boy looked at me and said, "I can't do that." I said, no, it's easy. Just walk right in and say, "Table for 3, please." I can't do that. Why can't you? Because of the anxiety in walking into a place. Social anxiety disorder is a disorder where people have trouble doing the most simple of things. I had a patient 24 years old-ish, and my first assignment with him was, I want you to walk into Walmart, and then I want you to walk out and go back to your car. That's it, the whole assignment. You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to talk to anybody. We actually had to start off by taking on basic challenges to overcome a social anxiety disorder like that. But I digress. The point being, we have enough information about mental disorders, psychological illnesses, and we have treatment for all of that, but people are not necessarily getting treatment when they know that there are disorders, when they've been diagnosed as having disorders. So let me shift gears and talk about social media and the effects of social media on the brain. Neuropsychology is a relatively new science, and we now have equipment, functional MRIs, where we can see the brains of people and we could see what areas of the brain are lighting up. So we understand, if somebody's going through something, or someone's trying to remember something, or someone's having an issue with depression, or someone's laughing, or whatever's going on, we could see what part of the brain is being triggered. And so some of this. The emotional area of the brain is called the amygdala. A lot of our feelings come right out of the amygdala. The memory center is the hippocampus. When you have OCD, you know what OCD is, you guys? When you have these obsessions, and then you have these compulsive behaviors that you're driven to do. Lots of people with OCD feel like they have to do a ritual before they can finish something. It's not unusual for somebody with OCD, for instance, to wash their hands 50 or 60 times a day, or they have to check. I have patients who would check their door. They know they locked it, but they have to go back and check it again, and they have to check it again, and they have to check it again. They know that they locked it, but they have to check it again. I worked with a woman recently. She was in her 70s, and she lived in a small apartment, but she had to check her apartment in every room to make sure she didn't leave a stove on or the bathtub water running. But it's a small apartment, and it took her a half hour to leave because she kept going around checking again. She doesn't even use the bathtub but she had to check again and check again. That's OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder it's called. But there's a certain part of the brain that lights up. We know what part of the brain is affected by OCD. We also know that the brain is a work in progress, that a person's brain is not finished until they're like in their mid-20s or 26 years old. You adolescent people, you young people, you have a wonderful brain, but it ain't finished yet. It's like a work in progress. You see those signs out there that says men at work, they're all working on your brain at night. And the part of the brain that is not yet finished is the prefrontal cortex. That's the part where you do your reasoning, your thinking, your executive skills, your judgment. That's the part of the brain that's not yet developed. Why is that significant? Because with adolescents, that's a pretty important part of the brain, and they're not ready to make adult decisions on things. An adolescent's brain is not yet ready to govern their own lives. That part of the brain is still under construction. And it's probably a big part of why they require these things called parents. Adolescents need parents. Adolescents need teachers. Adolescents need coaches. Adolescents need role models. The decisions that they make, they're not ready to govern their own lives yet. Is that clear to everybody? And now we understand why neurologically. So around the age 10-ish, children start to have a real strong need for social connection. People in my field, psychologists, all agree, we all agree that human beings are social animals. We don't all agree on how we got here. Some of us believe we were created by a loving God in a purposeful way, and some of us believe that we were evolved out of primordial ooze or some derivative. And some people believe in a combination of all those things, and you know what? It doesn't matter. We all agree on the fact that we absolutely need connection with other people. We are not supposed to isolate. In fact, we have so much research now on the importance of love and friendship and long-term relationships, and we also have research on isolation. And in fact, the Surgeon General cited research recently that said you can lose as many as 15 years off your life if you live in isolation. Well, what was the pandemic all about, if not a prolonged state of isolation? And that's what we had to deal with. We are little creatures. As little creatures, we need other people. And 10-year-olds are already experiencing changes in their brains such that they're looking to have connections with other people. They want to have approval. They want to be liked. They want to make friends. So when we talk about social media, how do we get approval? What do we trade in for approval? If you ever posted a video, what are you looking for? Likes. Yeah, essentially there's two ways to get approval on social media, right? What's the other one? Likes and, sorry? Youth? Oh, views, thank you, views. Yeah, I was going to say followers. You know, normally I don't like to be followed. But on social media, I want as many followers as possible when I do my mental health minutes on TikTok, because when you have a lot of followers, you know, it leads to good things. Yeah, you want people to view. You want people to like. You want people to follow you. And that's what children are learning for social connection now. That's what's being traded in for approval. Now, how important is it to have social connections? Well, the research says that it's more important in predicting future success than an IQ. Research says it's more important to have a good social connection than to have good academic grades. It's so vital to feel liked, to feel loved, to feel connected, to have a group of people that you love and love you, that it makes all the difference in our long-term success. And so when we have some kind of connection, when we have likes, when somebody reviews your video and gives it a like or says something kind about it, there's something going on in the brain. You know what that is? There's a release of a neurotransmitter. You're nodding, you know what it is. Dopamine. And we also have these things called oxytocins that are linked with love, that are linked with warm feelings between people. These things are secreted when people give us likes, when people follow us, when people view our material. And these things are traded in for some of the face-to-face connections and approval that we all need. Does that make sense to people? Our kids are trading in-person contact and connection for social media. Now, let's talk for a minute about video games. Video games have become so realistic and so exciting and so fantastic that they're so addictive. I saw a movie a while ago, Social Dilemma. How many of you saw that movie? Okay. So in the movie, they were interviewing these brilliant engineers and IT guys in Silicon Valley in California, and these guys admitted at least two things of note to me. Number one, we don't let our kids play. These guys designed these fantastic games, and their own children are not allowed to play them. And the second thing of note, which is why they won't let them play, is because they're deliberately addictive. They were created, they were devised so that your children cannot put these things down. I have treated personally at least 3 young men who came home from college dropping out, smart kids, good schools. They didn't even make it a semester because once they were at school, they were playing video games and nobody was monitoring that. And they were playing and they were playing, and soon they stopped sleeping and they weren't going to classes and they were barely eating and there were very few bathroom breaks. And amazingly enough, they either withdrew or they got straight Fs. Smart kids. But they had destroyed their entire college future, at least at the time, because they could not stop. Now the research says, the new research says that the neural pathways in our brain where the kids get addicted to this are the same ones where adults are addicted to alcohol, cocaine, pornography, gambling. Whatever it is that we're addicted to, it's the same neural pathways that our kids are being addicted or getting addicted to video games. And the same thing is true with social media. Now, sometimes there's connections online and your kids will say that, you know, I have friends, I talk to some people online. Well, there's some new research that says if the connections are shallow, if the connections are very lightweight, very much in passing, no real caring, that it serves almost like junk food for the head. There's no nutrients. It doesn't help to satisfy. In fact, kids report that they're more lonely. They're more lonely after consuming social media than before they did. It's not meeting the needs. It's not giving them the social fulfillment. Is that true 100% of the time? No, there are some real connections on social media. You can make a good friend. You can have people that end up being really important in your life. I'm not going to say it's all bad, but I am going to say that you can spend hours and hours and hours on social media and walk away feeling worse about yourself, more lonely, and more isolated than when you were on. Further, there are bad behaviors that your kids have the ability to say those are bad behaviors, but according to the research, when they view them on social media and there's a whole bunch of likes and positive comments and followers, it serves as a way of negating the prefrontal cortex's ability to say that's a bad behavior. It looks cool on social media. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about the fact that there are things on social media that you don't want your children to see, but other kids are doing it in a way and making it look cool. Like what? You can find videos that not only show how cool it is to do, but how to do it, so your parents won't find you out. Here's where you should cut. I have a patient now who was terribly abused when she was a little girl. Now she's 13 years old, and she makes sure that she tells me that when she has a panic attack, she says, I'll grind my nails into myself because I'm cutting myself. Like, she's saying it in a way where she wants me to know that she's kind of proud of the fact that she knows what that is. And she's been taught by friends, by social media, that that's an okay thing to do. The same thing's true with eating disorders. We have a lot of young ladies and young men too, not as many young men, but they learn through social media how to stay thin and how to binge and how to purge, and how the best way to throw up their food when they can do it, how to use laxatives, how to do this in a way where nobody will know. And it's enticing. It's deemed to be appropriate, exciting, attractive, cool. There are fights that go on in social media, and people will film these fights. And something that your kid probably would never do, but there's all kinds of arousal in the brain watching these fights on social media. And it's kind of exciting. It actually registers in the brain as being appealing. And it disinhibits the prefrontal cortex. It makes it so their best judgment is not really available. They sometimes find it attractive to do things that you would never want them to do. And they learned it on social media. Does that make sense to everybody? As above, social media can make disordered behavior look cool, like excessive drinking, vaping. There's all kinds of videos on vaping marijuana. And again, different types of self-mutilation. Now, the extreme media use is something that we're all concerned about. You know, we can talk about what's healthy, how much is enough, but it gets to be addictive. And these very same researchers, these guys who designed the video games and such, they'll say, try not to be on it for more than an hour. You know, your pediatrician would say an hour or two at the most of any kind of media. They're trying to help parents, you know, to get a handle on this. But it's such a fantastic babysitter, isn't it? You could put your kid in the room and you don't hear a sound for 6 hours. It's great. But it's not really good for their brains, and it's not really good for their development, and it's not really good, we're understanding, for their psychological well-being or their mental health. People compare themselves to what they see online. And what gets the most likes? Beautiful people, beautiful girls especially. Girls dancing, girls showing you their new clothes. There's so much of that. At first I thought that's all TikTok was, you know, pretty young girls dancing. There is so much of that. And here's where the problem is, or a problem. The younger the girl is who watches these videos, the worse for her self-esteem and self-confidence, because she is going to compare herself to what she sees in these videos, and she's not going to feel good about herself. Years ago, there was a graduation speech given by a man. I don't know if they ever determined who originally wrote it, but it was a lot of wisdom, a lot of advice, and he was talking to college graduates. And one of the things he said that I thought was really kind of smart is he said, do not read beauty magazines because they will make you feel ugly. Don't read beauty magazines because you'll end up feeling ugly. Well, it's the same thing, and it's worse now with the social media. It's not just a matter of a few pictures of, you know, Cindy Crawford and supermodels. This proliferates throughout social media, and there's girls feeling so much less than, don't feel attractive. I don't have to look further than my own 14-year-old daughter. All the adults who see her say, oh, she's so beautiful. If you ask her, she says, I know what's really true. I'm ugly, Dad. You're ugly? What? Oh no, in her mind, she knows what beautiful is, and she's not that. And a big part of that comes from social media. She's on TikTok. She's on, what is it, Instagram. My wife's laughing. She's on it too. I always call it Instacart because that's where you get your groceries from Publix. They bring it to your house. Anyway, recognize that the earlier somebody starts on these social media apps, the more they're exposing themselves to ideas that you don't want them to have in their minds. If you're their parent or you're their teacher, you would not teach them that binging and purging is cool. You wouldn't teach them that self-mutilation is a great way to handle emotions. You wouldn't teach them to look at every beautiful woman and compare yourself unfavorably. You want to leave the house because you're not good enough. You would never teach those things, but I'm guaranteeing you they're learning those messages through exposure to social media. University of North Carolina published a study recently that found that children repeatedly check their social media, and 78% of 13 to 17-year-olds check social media at least hourly, at least once in an hour. But here's the part that really impressed me. 35% constantly, all day long. If they're awake, they're on social media. They're checking all the time. That's how the brain is being programmed. And back to those guys who designed it, they'll tell you that every time that there's a message that comes in, it's like a secretion of dopamine, the pleasure neurotransmitter in the brain. It's so addictive that people want to send out messages to others just so they could get other ones back, making a little ding, a little mark in the brain. And we now have research that says this actually softens the brain in a way so that people are less able to fend off disapproval. The more that you're on social media, the less resistant you are, the more you are inclined to respond poorly to criticism, the more you're hypersensitive. You know, whenever we use the word hyper, it means overly, like hyperactive children are overly active. Well, if you're hypersensitive, and that's what the research is saying, if you're on social media very often, it makes you hypersensitive to feedback coming in from other people. You are more likely to feel rejection. You're more likely to suffer when somebody says something that isn't flattering. What about bullying? As a psychologist, I've dealt with people who've been bullied. I had the wonderful opportunity to work with a kid who was bullied for early in his life, several incidents that he shared with me. But as a result of his bullying, he spent his entire adolescence in his room. And when I met him, he was like 23, 24 years old and still in his room. So sad. A smart kid, good-looking kid, but devastated, shattered by a couple of these bullying situations. And my job was to help him kind of regurgitate everything that happened, and we're going to work through it, and we're starting over again, because you got to get yourself out of the room and functioning in this world. You cannot spend the rest of your days locked in that room where it's safe. But it all came from bullying. Well, what about cyberbullying? What do we know about cyberbullying? Well, first of all, it's actually worse sometimes than face-to-face bullying, because people can say worse things, nasty, mean things online that they're less inclined to say face-to-face. People can be incredibly mean online when they don't know the other person. Post a video and somebody thinks it's stupid or your dancing is weird. They could say something so mean and so horrible. And you know what the research is saying now? The part of the brain that's affected when we're bullied is the same part of the brain that registers physical pain. If you were punched in the face, your brain would light up in a certain spot. That's the same part of the brain that responds when we're bullied. It's like a neurological event. When somebody says something, that's why I said to my daughter, don't you dare tell that boy he's not cute. I don't care what you have to tell him. You don't say anything like, you don't know how much you could be wounding another person. And you people, you're people of faith. So I don't mind talking to you about your faith, and I don't mind talking to you about things that are biblical. For instance, and forgive me for jumping into this, but in the book of James, the author James will tell you that the tongue is this powerful instrument. It's this little tiny thing, but he compares it to the rudder of a ship that determines what direction the ship goes in. And we are to use our tongues to edify, to build up, to help, never to destroy. I grew up in a family where it was okay. Who could say the wittiest thing, the most cutting thing? That was terrible. As a psychologist, I've learned never, never, never to use my tongue to cut my patients, never. Even if they're doing something that they know is not good for them, or it's really a poor decision, I have a responsibility to use my tongue to help them, never to belittle them, never to shame them, never to emasculate them, never to make them feel like they are worthless. So much of the time they come in because they already feel that degree of worthlessness and inadequacy. My job is to help, to edify. And so if you're people of faith, and if you're people who want to emulate Jesus, let this mind be in you that was also in Christ Jesus. If you want to think like Jesus, then you're thinking in terms of using your tongue to help, never to cut, never to hurt. So before I go into the what do we do about all of this, do we have any questions on anything so far? Anybody still awake? Okay. I have some ideas. I don't claim to have all the ideas or all the solutions, but I wanted to stimulate at least some dialogue about this. You know, let's put it out there. Social media is not going away. It's here to stay. What should we do? So the very first thing I'm going to say is not going to surprise you, and that is control, as a parent, what your child consumes. If I let my child, my 11-year-old son, choose what we would eat for dinner, we would have cupcakes and Coca-Cola, and that would be the entree. And then for dessert, we would have ice cream and cake and cookies. And that makes sense to me because everything I just mentioned, that releases dopamine in my brain. I love that stuff too. But here's the thing, he doesn't have the ability to make good decisions when it comes to what to consume. It's up to me as his dad. It's up to a parent to decide what the child consumes. Alcohol, drugs, TV, internet, video games, reading material. That's up to you as a parent to determine what and how much. How much Coca-Cola is okay? How much video game is okay? What kind of video game? Are you, what's the one where they steal cars all the time? What's the stealing? Come on, you guys know the video game. It was like the #1 seller. Grand Theft Auto, thank you. It doesn't mean you've done it before. You can just throw it out there. Yeah, do you want your kids doing Grand Theft Auto? I mean, it's a call you have to make as a parent. And how much? And so what do we do with that? Some parents say, I stalk my kids on social media. They come up with fictitious accounts and they follow them on everything to see what they're doing. Some people just simply say, you're doing none of that until you're this age. Or some people say, we don't have that in our house at all. Or some people say, you got an hour a day. You know, you can put limits on their time. What's that called when you monitor that? Screen time, right? You guys have screen time? I hope so. How many hours would you do if you didn't have screen time? A lot. That's the best answer. How about all of them? I mean, is it addictive? Is it easy? When my daughter goes over her girlfriend's house, the very first thing is, like after she's there an hour, there's a request on my phone that says, Melina wants a request for more TikTok time. No, you got an hour, that's it. But it's like, aren't you supposed to visit with friends? What do you guys do when you're together? You just like look at TikTok videos the whole time. That's what you do. Okay, so what about the concept of privacy? How much privacy should you give your children? How much do they deserve? I don't intend to give you the answer on this. You have to make that decision as a parent. Do you have any ideas? Anybody want to throw something out? Don't worry that you'll be recorded forever and ever on that. But what do you think about privacy? Should your child, if your child has an online diary, if they have the old-fashioned diary, do you have the right to read it? Amen. That's the videographer saying that. Do you? Why? Somebody say something as to why. Why do you think you have the right to read your child's? Because you're responsible for them. You are responsible for what they consume. You're responsible for all the outcomes. And if you read something that's mind-blowing in their journal, something that surprises you, you know what that means? You didn't know them as well as you thought you did. They've got some things going on. And if they're cutting themselves, if they're smoking marijuana, don't you want to know? Now you can have parents who say, I don't believe that. I think my child is a human being who has rights, and they have a right to some privacy. You're a parent, you're entitled to that opinion. You're entitled to whatever. But as this teacher, you're a parent also, aren't you? Yeah. As this parent/teacher said, I'm responsible for all things until that child is 18. I should know what's going on with them. It's a tough subject, isn't it? The next point I want to make is that you owe it to your kids to keep the lines of communication open at all times. The adolescent years can be very, very challenging. There could be so much going on, and a lot of it is changing moods. A lot of it is disrespectful behavior, things that you can't believe you let your child say to you without you killing them. There's so much that you have to withstand as a parent. And guess what? You need to keep the lines of communication open with them at all times, because they want to feel safe enough to tell you what's going on. And if they don't confide in you, or if they confide in one of you, maybe not your husband, or maybe they do you as a father, but they don't your wife, if they have at least one person that they'll talk to, that's good. If neither one of you is a safe place, we have issues then. We need open communication. Adolescents need to have safe parents and safe adults to talk to. You know, this world is overwhelmingly difficult. And when you're an adolescent and so much is changing, both inside your head, your brain, your hormones, and also outside in your world, boy, it really helps to have solid and stable and reliable and predictable, loving, consistently loving parents who end up, yeah, I know you're having a hard time. I love you no matter what. I forgive all things, and I'm always going to try to help you. Don't shut down the lines of communication because your child has exasperated you. Don't give up on the fact that it's so necessary to connect, even if they decided you don't know anything. Now they know everything, you don't know anything. Keep the lines of communication open. Somebody is going to raise them, someone's going to parent them, and if it's not you, it might be the videos on TikTok. It might be what they're consuming on social media. They're going to have information one way or another. And speaking of that, I want to encourage you to talk to them in advance about things that they're going to encounter on these social apps. They're going to see violence, whether you want them to see it or not, unless you just say there'll be no TV, there'll be no movies, there'll be no social media. If you kind of wipe all those things out, maybe you can try and protect them from all the things you don't want them to see. But they're going to be exposed to things like pornography. Even though you know, back in the day, the only way you could get pornography is you'd have to, buy a magazine somewhere or go to one of those peep show things. The world has changed. It's easy access. They're going to see things they're not ready for. And as parents, you owe it to your children to give them the first line of communication on that. And you may have to say, you're going to see some things that are disturbing to you between men and women, and I want to tell you about it. I don't, you share what you believe. I don't like that. I think it's exploitation of women. I don't condone, whatever you can teach them. But if you wait until they bring it up, there's a really good chance they already have formed opinions and they've seen so much of it and you don't even know that. Sometimes I'm blown away by what kind of information my daughter already has. And I don't like the conclusions, because the conclusions lots of times came from social media and peers. It's like, I'm a psychologist. I have all this experience. You can talk to me about that, and chances are I'll have something that's a little bit more grounded in evidence-based research and not just somebody's whim or somebody who's trying to impress you with their video. But I still have to earn that kind of trust. I still have to make it safe. I still have to be a father that's worth going to, that's safe enough to go to. And even though I have all 80,000 hours of psychotherapy, that doesn't mean I'm always an excellent listener. I usually am clinically, but sometimes I find with my kids I'm not an excellent listener. I should be quiet more and listen more. I should ask the questions I would ask my patients before I draw any conclusions. I should make sure I understand the whole thing before I offer any feedback. It's not easy to do that as a parent. The big difference between me as a parent and me as a doctor to my patients is that it feels so much more personal. And I feel like have even more responsibility. But I still need to use the clinical skills, the listening skills that I have. Next thing I have is fill your kids' free time with important activities. Give them choices about what they love to do, but make sure they do things like sports, clubs, music, art, volunteer work, gainful employment, church activities, positions of responsibility. And there's a really good justification for everything I just said. You know what it is? Colleges require that now. Colleges like the straight A's, but you know what they're de-emphasizing now is all those tests. The SATs and those kinds of tests. Some of them are not even asking for it, but they want to know what you're doing socially. You doing any volunteer work? Do you have any jobs? You helping anybody? Were you president of this, vice president of that? Were you in the Key Club? Captain of the swim team? Why am I telling you these things? Because if they're doing those things, they're doing good things, they're doing productive things, they're doing pro-social things, they're doing social things that are good for their brains, and they're also staying away from the hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of social media. And that's your job as parents, because even their free time, you want to govern. You don't have to be a swimmer. You don't have to play the violin. But you got to pick something. There are so many things you can do. Choose one. Choose one and get involved in that. Or choose more than one. I've had the privilege to go to a Pineview graduation before. For those of you who don't know, Pineview is the #1 school in the state. And it's just an amazing school of gifted kids. And they let me do my social black belt program there, which is really a lot of fun because the kids are brilliant and they're wanting to learn. But here's the point. In going to a graduation there, every kid is amazing. They're not only carrying that load, but every kid is like, this kid started a business when he was 17. And this one plays the violin. And he's also co-captain on the gymnastics team. He's like every kid. And a big part of that is not just that they have a superior intellect. What they have is hands-on parents who are like, you're going to be involved in a lot of things. It's not enough for you to just be a straight A student. You got to have it going on. And one of the best ways to not play tug of war with social media is keep the kids busy doing so many other things. There ain't a lot of time for social media. Another thing, regular family time. How many of you people have regular family time? How important is that? And that could be as simple as we eat dinner the same time every night or certain nights a week. Or it could be as simple as Wednesday. You know what Wednesday is? Wednesday is when kid number 2 is in charge of dinner. I'll help you, but you're picking out the food and you're picking out the menu, and I will help you prepare it. And Thursday, that's kid number 1. And you know, Friday night, maybe you have a family game time or a family movie. But the point is, we have to have things going on as a family as much as you can, because these are the seeds that, when planted, have very positive long-term growth. They need, you know, if you find out who's doing things like shooting, who's doing crazy crimes, who's committing suicide or homicide, so many times there's a very disrupted family life. You know, if you just looked at the research on divorce alone, divorce is such a bad thing. I am divorced, I'm remarried, but I have kids, and my poor kids had to go through a divorce. And I know the research, you know, and we have to understand that disruption in family life is bad for kids. And therefore what? Therefore we need family activities. We need hands-on time with them. We not only need quality time, we need quantity time. It's important to spend a lot of time with your kids. And that also means not just Disney time, but come wash the car with me time. Let's all fold the laundry as a family together time. We're all going to do this project. We're all painting the fence together time. Kids learn so much from you, and not just when you're trying to teach them. Your microphone is always on as a parent. They're always watching you. When they tell people about you, you'll be amazed at how observant they are, because they're always watching you. You guys know Jordan Peterson? He's a psychologist that's way more famous and successful than I am. So therefore I'm jealous. But I also read his book about the 12 rules or whatever it is. I was really impressed by a lot of it. He's a brilliant man, seriously, brilliant man. But one of the rules, the reason I'm mentioning this is, one of the rules is, don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. I thought, what a cool rule that is. I don't like my daughter when she, and therefore I'm going to call her on that every time. That's not okay, because I love you to pieces. I'd go to the moon for you and back, but I don't like you when you behave like that. That is not acceptable behavior. I never taught you that behavior. I'll never condone that behavior. You change that behavior. That's part of our hands-on parenting, is not only to be encouraging, loving, and get them involved in all kinds of things, but it's also to say, these things are out of bounds. Not okay, unacceptable. I am never going to be okay about you treating an adult like you just treated that adult. Unacceptable. I never, ever will think that's okay. And you owe them that. Because lots of times when you don't say anything, what you're doing inadvertently, what? You're reinforcing it. You're condoning it. You didn't say that was unacceptable, so therefore you said it was acceptable. I'm sure that makes sense to all of you. The next thing I have is build a foundation of F words for your children. That is faith, family, and forgiveness. Teach your children that a lot of mental health is about letting go. That's what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is letting go. And don't keep grudges, and you show them how I don't keep grudges. I love you even though I was upset with you last night. I'm fine this morning. I told you what I was upset about. I let it go. We want to teach forgiveness. We want to model forgiveness. Where did we get that from? Who is the king of forgiveness? Right? That's practicing your faith. So we want to teach them the importance of family, the importance of forgiveness. We want them to understand that our faith is something that we don't just practice on Sundays. We live, we act out what we... It always reminds me of the mob movies. Those guys would always go to church, and then they go out and whack somebody later. It's like, how do they... Isn't there some kind... I don't know. But we, faith is not something you just, we go to church because we have to go to church. It's like you live your faith. You emulate Jesus in your behavior. You teach your children what you think Christ would teach your children. I was asked to do some speaking in some local churches, and I gave them a talk on the mind of Christ. How did Jesus think? And of course my daughter said, "Dad, you can't speak on how Jesus thought. You never even met him." I said, "Oh yeah. When I was a sophomore at Bethlehem High School," Jesus was a senior, and we used to, she's like, people go to you for help, Dad? But here's the point. We know how Jesus thought. All you have to do is read the Gospels. We know that Jesus was really loving. We know that Jesus was very forgiving. We know that he was humble. I listed 8 things, and since we can understand how he thought, we could emulate that to the best of our ability. We can humbly say, that's who I aspire to be, and teach our children, not from a position of always preaching and condescending, but living it, acting it. What would Jesus do? How would Jesus handle this situation? And most of the time it would be with a big hug and a great big smile, and boy do I love you. And we can also work on what needs improvement. Get all the advice and instruction you can so you will be wise the rest of your life. That's Proverbs 19:20. It says the wise seek counsel. I've always liked that as a psychologist. Who seeks counsel? Fools? No, wise people. Smart people. If I were president of the United States, I would surround myself with experts in every field, because I don't know anything about climate change. I don't. But if I were president, I would say, who knows the most about it? And then I would say, those guys or those ladies. I would surround myself with the smartest people, because the wise people know that they don't know, and they should seek counsel. If you're struggling with something, I'll guarantee you there are people who have some answers and have some help for you. And sometimes that's professionals in my field, but sometimes it's a matter of you need information on who's the best plumber in your town. Sometimes you need information on financial matters, mortgage rates, or whatever. The wise seek counsel. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to seek out professional help for your family. And finally, yeah, that was pretty strange, wasn't it? Do you guys have a problem with spirits in the back there? All right, finally, teach mental health skills to children. I mean, I'm a big believer in that. I wrote the Social Black Belt program. I really believe there's things we could teach children from a young age that make a difference throughout their lives. Why wouldn't we give them skills to take with them through life instead of the myths that abound? My favorite myth, there are several myths that really bother me as a mental health professional, but my favorite myth is time heals all wounds. Time just passes. Healing is active. Healing requires dealing with whatever happened to you and learning how to let go, not time passing. And why don't we teach this? Why don't we teach things like this to children? So if you're an educator, if you're a parent, you know, get help where you need to have help, but also learn, read things with your kids. Talk about mental health issues, because if you don't, they'll come back to bite you later. And always keep in mind, and this is a belief, you know, I've been at this a long time, don't think for a minute that your faith is contradicted by science and by the science of psychology. There are many people like myself who have no problem integrating science and the field of psychology. I have to pick and choose where I use my faith professionally, but I always have a sense that all truth is God's truth. And if I share truth with somebody, whether it's from a Bible verse or whether it's just something that we've learned along the way, if it's truth, it's God's truth. So don't think for a minute that you have to shy away from mental health things, because God is the author of all truth. And the brain, the fascinating brain we're learning about, that's God's creation. And so you can learn good things and you can share good things with your children as a teacher and as a parent.